Welcome to the reading of the Christian Science Monitor for Friday, March the 5th, 2021. My name is Pam, and let's begin with our first article. Florida puts seniors first, how that changed its pandemic response, by Patrick Johnson. Jacksonville, Florida. California has an online system of access codes to make sure that shots are distributed equally across different demographics. In Massachusetts, a multi-layered priority list and inconsistent guidance has sown confusion and a political backlash. In Tennessee, the county that encompasses Memphis recently ruined thousands of shots after changing state protocols to favor local teachers. In many states, the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines has faced multiple headwinds in terms of supply and demand. Some blame political and social agendas that dictate who should go first. Here in Florida, the message is simpler. If you're 65 or older, step right up. In church basements, pop-up clinics, and grocery stores, state programs are prioritizing a vulnerable age group that, not coincidentally, is overrepresented in the Sunshine State, a political background. Frontline health workers and nursing home staff were also eligible in the first phase. Florida is one of only two states, the other is West Virginia, that chose not to give its first shots to teachers, police, and firefighters. It's a throw it to the wind response that seems to be working. Comparing with other similar large states, Florida ranks in the middle of the pack in per capita vaccinations. More than 3 million residents here have received at least one dose. Its vaccination strategy, coupled with its drive to reopen for business and education, could yet be undone by various unknowns. And political leaders also face accusations of steering more vaccines to wealthier white communities than to minority residents. A recent pop-up vaccination hub in wealthy Manatee County near Sarasota was lambasted as a favor to a political donor. Yet, Florida's less prescriptive approach to distribution appears to have had some success. At a time when states are all trying to apply their values, complex distribution schemes such as those in California and Massachusetts speak to a desire to act ethically. But Florida is showing that simpler can sometimes be better, or at least faster. In West Virginia, health officials made it a matter of service and duty for many frontline workers to forego their shots so the state's oldest residents could go first, particularly when doses were limited. Einstein said genius is taking the complex and making it simple, which also makes it easy to make the simple complex, says Dr. Clay Marsh, the state's COVID-19 czar. For us, it wasn't about 1,000 things, it was about one thing: saving lives. At times, West Virginia's vaccination rate has led the nation. Lately, it has also seen a sharp drop in COVID-19 caseloads, something which Dr. Marsh, Vice President for Health Sciences at West Virginia University, credits to the vaccine rollout. I understand that each state has a unique strategy, says Dr. Marsh, but our strategy? To call on our better angels and a sense of service to prioritize this group of highly vulnerable people over themselves have given us a special sense of pride. Move fast, keep it simple. Overall, states with smaller rural populations have vaccinated residents relatively quickly. One state that recently surpassed West Virginia in per capita vaccinations is Alaska, where dog sleds have helped cover a vast territory. Another factor appears to be that states with effective vaccination programs set simple rules and adjust them as they went along. States are trying to be agile, flexible, and learn and not be afraid to implement and measure rapidly. We are learning to fail fast and fail forward, says Dr. Marsh. Florida's pandemic response has not always gotten good press. Indeed, its lax approach to vacationers was blamed last spring for seeding COVID-19 outbreaks across the country during the first wave. Decisions to reopen beaches this year and host spectators at the Super Bowl in Tampa were also criticized. but were framed here by many as counterintuitive successes, built on an understanding that government works best when it reflects communal touchstones. This is a free state, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said recently after launching a critique of lockdowner states. He has also hailed his decision to keep schools open, pointing to low infection rates among students in Florida compared with other states. Those comparisons appear to be flawed. Governor DeSantis, a Republican and staunch ally of former Donald Trump, reportedly omitted data of students ages 15 to 18, unlike other states, making Florida look better than it is. That said, spread out housing and living arrangements and a warm climate and all are X factors that may have contributed to Florida's ability to weather the pandemic while keeping its economy more or less on track. Florida is its own special mess, says Diane Roberts, a professor of English at Florida State University and longtime observer of its politics. But it's real interesting. DeSantis is carrying on as if this relative success is his doing, and some of it might well be. What's political about that? As he readies to make his annual pilgrimage back home to Michigan's Upper Peninsula, snowbird retiree Larry Smith is concerned that politics has played into Florida's vaccine strategy. He had hoped to get vaccinated here, but complained about vaccine tourism led to a tightening of rules to exclude non-residents. Now Mr. Smith has to wait until at least April when he returns to Michigan, a delay that he sees as another example of politics hampering the effort. If the goal is saving people's lives, he says, what's politics about that? For Mr. DeSantis, the relative success of Florida's vaccine rollout certainly packs a political punch, and he's not shy about calling out critics or feeding red meat to his conservative base. In doing so, the governor has tapped into what makes Florida, well, Florida, says veteran GOP pollster Whit Ayers, who has worked with Mr. DeSantis on COVID-19 messaging. Every good governor tries to lift up the values of their state, says Mr. Ayers, and in fact, the ones who have been most successful addressing COVID-19 seem to be the ones doing so within the values that dominate their state. In the case of West Virginia, the state opted not to work with national pharmacy chains, instead going direct to independent pharmacies whose local networks were able to find and vaccinate the most vulnerable residents. It also staffed its own telephone hotline and chose not to outsource online booking of appointments. To West Virginians like Dr. Marsh, this approach reflects a culture of self-reliance, service orientation, and being scrappy. Police and teachers get their turn. Until this week, Florida was one of only 4 states that, after deciding who goes first, hadn't begun vaccinating other designated groups such as teachers and police officers. It would be nice to have some idea of who the priority populations are going to be, because people want to know where they stand, where they are in line, says University of Florida epidemiologist Cindy Prinz, who has volunteered at several smaller sites. She points out that while vaccinating older Florida residents is effective in saving lives, infection rates are generally much higher among younger people who are lowest on the priority list. As a result, we may not see a full effect on community immunity until we can get into 20-somethings and even teenagers and get those people vaccinated, she said. The federal government is opening 4 mass vaccination sites in Florida, including one here at Gateway Mall, as past its prime retail plaza on Jacksonville's primarily black north side. And starting on Wednesday, police, firefighters, and teachers ages 50 and up will be eligible for appointments at the mass sites. For Danny Gooden, a Jacksonville retiree who just got vaccinated, culture and values are fine, but what he sees lacking is better communication to Black residents about the efficacy and necessity of the shot. Given past testing of controversial therapies on Black people, many are wary of vaccination. Vaccine hesitancy is highest among Black Americans under 40, according to national survey data. This shouldn't be about individuals or who is who, says Mr. Gooden. It should be about all of us. Moving on to our next article, IROC's Christians, barely hanging on. Prepare for Papal Visit by Miriam Pham. Nasser Banamine speaks about his hometown of Qarqash in historical heartland of Iraqi Christianity with nostalgia. Before Islamic State group fighters swept through the Nineveh plains in the northern Iraq, before the militants shattered his sense of peace, before panicked relatives and neighbors fled, some never to return. Iraq's Christian communities in the area were dealt a severe blow when they were scattered by the IS onslaught in 2014, further shrinking the country's already dwindling Christian population. Many hope their struggle to endure will get a boost from a historic vote by Pope Francis, whose visit is planned for this weekend. Among the places on his itinerary is Qarqash, where this week Vatican and Iraqi flags fluttered from light poles, some adorned with the Pope's image. Pope Francis's visit, his first foreign trip since the coronavirus pandemic and the first ever by a pope to Iraq, is a sign that you're not alone, says Monsignor Segundo Tejado Munoz, the Undersecretary of the Vatican's Development Office. There's someone who is thinking of you, who is with you. And these signs are so important. So important. The IS juggernaut and the long war to drive the militants out of left ransacked homes and charred or pulverized buildings around the north. But the biggest loss, perhaps, has been the people. Traditionally, Christian towns across the Nineveh plains virtually emptied out, and by some of the widely varying estimates, fewer than half of the Christians who fled have returned. The Vatican and the Pope have frequently insisted on the need to preserve Iraq's ancient Christian communities and create the security, economic, and social conditions for those who have left to return. To do that, the Vatican for years has helped coordinate a network of Catholic non-governmental organizations providing help in the field in Iraq and other countries, including in education, healthcare, and reconstruction. The aid is non-denominational. Muslims are helped as well as Christians, and the overall hope is that the delicate interfaith balance can be preserved and strengthened. The Pope's Friday through Monday visit will also have a strong interfaith component. People want to look for a better future for their families, so you can't stop them if they have the intention of going somewhere else, Mr. Tejado Munoz said, but at least we try to create the conditions they might return. That could be difficult. Many Christians who fled the IS advance have either stayed in Iraq's Kurdistan region or started new lives abroad, while those who have returned have been rebuilding fractured but vibrant communities with resolve. Some still feel vulnerable and eye better lives elsewhere. Mr. Banamine returned in 2019 from the Kurdish region to his house in Qarqash, also known as Baghdida, but many family members who fled like him ended up in Australia and Germany. IS sleeper cells still carry out attacks in parts of Iraq, so he's worried about the specter of a militant resurgence, the future of his 3 children, and Iraq's economic and security woes. The homeland is the family, not the house. I feel very homesick, he said. When something is broken, it doesn't go back to the way it used to be. Their home has been repaired, but the sight of empty or damaged ones on their street remind his wife, Ban Said, of the IS reign of terror. After she gave birth to the couple's 3rd child in December, she wondered if it would have been better for their daughter to have been born abroad. If we left, I am sure their future would be better abroad, not like here, she said. There would be safety, and I wouldn't be scared for them when they come and go. In nearby Bartella, Sargana Isa said he felt the town's spirit dim with so many familiar faces gone. Walking down a street, I used to salute so many people, friends, and neighbors. Now there's hardly any of that, says Mr. Isa. Life is not like before. There's no flavor to it. Even those Christians who have returned to Bartella say they want to leave to find stability. He too would like to leave if he could. His mother tells him she wants to die in Iraq. I try to change her mind and tell her, let's travel and live without worry or fear, somewhere where we wouldn't be driven out of our homes, he said. She tells me we should stay and that God is with us. The numerical decline and waning clout of Iraqi Christians started before the Islamic State's persecution of religious minorities like theirs. Christians were among groups targeted by militants amid the breakdown in security after the 2003 United States-led invasion that overthrew Saddam Hussein. The Chaldean Catholic Patriarch Cardinal Louis Raphael Sacco estimated that 1 million Christians have left Iraq since 2003, and about 500,000 remained. But there are no official figures, and estimates vary. Some put the numbers left at fewer than 250,000. Without faith that the government can provide legal protection and economic opportunities or security from potential violence, many Christians are wary of returning. William Warda, co-founder of Hammurabi Human Rights Organization in Baghdad, said the Christian presence is under threat. To this day, they don't feel safe and secure because the state is weak and the rule of law is weak. Some Christians lament broken trust with some Muslims in neighboring villages whom they believe sympathized with IS or helped pillage their homes. They are also wary of the ascension of largely Shiite militias and fearful of what they say are unfavorable demographic changes some traditionally Christian areas. Etched in the minds of many are the memories of the flight to escape IS, the indignities of displacement, and the scenes of devastation that awaited those who returned, including burnt-out churches and desecrated tombs. As he left under cover of darkness shortly before the militants entered his town of Karmalis in 2014, the Reverend Thalbot Habib felt pain for all that he was leaving behind. He took little besides some manuscripts, including a Bible. It was as if we had been expelled forever from the lands of our grandfathers. More than 2 years would pass before Mr. Habib could set foot in the town. The smell of smoke from burnt-out structures still hung in the air. In November 2016, he held prayers at St. Addie Church, the sound of broken glass crunching beneath the feet of worshippers stunned by the damage around them. Decapitated statues of Jesus and Virgin Mary stood in the scarred church that day. One woman wept bitterly. Much reconstruction has taken place since, but so far only about 345 of about 820 Christian families in pre-2014 Karmalis have returned, Mr. Habib said. We need to restore our numbers to support the Christian presence and identity in our town, he said. Those who did come back make sure an ancient heritage and a way of life endure. At St. Paul's House for Church Services in Karakwash, religious paintings and musical instruments were burned and a statue of Jesus hurled to the ground, said the Reverend Duradad Barber, the former manager. But the house's activities, which include religious classes and teaching the Syriac language, have been revived and even expanded. We decided to return and serve this wounded and pained country to the last drop of our blood, he said. As Christians, we believe that we are like the salt that adds flavor to food. This story was reported by the Associated Press. AP writers Nicole Winfred in Rome, Hadid Mizban in Karakwesh, and Samra Kulab in Baghdad contributed. Moving on to our next article, A Blessed Gift, How One Mississippi Man Keeps the Blues Alive, by Leah Willingham, Associated Press. In Betonia, Mississippi, with calloused hands, Jimmy Duck Holmes plucks an old acoustic guitar at the juke joint where parents started more than 70 years ago. He checks the cafe's inventory, jars of pickled eggs, beef jerky, pork hots. He tends to the wood-burning stove made from an oil field pipe, and every morning he eventually settles in on a stool behind the counter, waiting, hoping that someone who wants to hear him play will drop in. Mr. Holmes, in his 70s, is the last Bentonian bluesman, the carrier of a dying musical and oral storytelling tradition born in this Mississippi town of less than 500 people. And now he's a Grammy-nominated artist with a recent nod in the Best Traditional Blues Album category for Cypress Grove, a record he hopes will help preserve the Bentonia blues long after he's gone. The world has changed around Mr. Holmes and his Blue Front Cafe, the country's oldest surviving juke joint. Across the South, the venues, historically owned and frequented by African Americans, have shuttered as owners pass away. Blues experts believe Mr. Holmes is the only American running a juke joint owned by his parents. It's quiet outside the Blue Front, a small building with cinder block walls off a dusty rural Mississippi road. Across the street are the railroad tracks that run through Bentonia. Next door sits an old cotton gin. It's here, at the Blue Front, that Mr. Holmes will watch the March 14th ceremony and learn whether he won the Grammy. He can't go in person because of the coronavirus pandemic, and that suits him just fine. He'll be surrounded by musicians from across Mississippi who want to play with him. I'll be here in this hole in the wall every day for as long as I can so that people don't forget, Mr. Holmes said. We're trying to make sure it doesn't die. When the Blue Front opened in 1948, it was the first African American owned retail business in Bentonia, then a majority black farming community. Mr. Holmes was just a baby. His parents, Carrie and Mary, were sharecroppers. Mary ran the Blue Front during the day, while Mr. Holmes worked with his father in the fields. By age 9, Mr. Holmes was operating a tractor all by himself. The Holmes business was a community gathering place. People came to have their laundry pressed, get a haircut, or pick up salt, pepper, and other non-perishables. And they came for the blues. Musicians lined up outside to play the Blue Front, guitars strapped to their backs and harmonicas in their pockets. During cotton picking season, the Blue Front was open 24 hours a day to accommodate farm workers who came in for a hot plate of Mary's famous buffalo fish. On weekends, people stayed all night drinking moonshine, dancing, and playing music. The town was never home to more than 600 residents, but its location on the Illinois Central Railway drew visitors. Later, the only roadway from Memphis to Jackson passed directly through Bentonia, furthering its popularity. Historians traveled through Mississippi to document blues musicians discovered Bentonia's style. It's described as haunting and eerie. Its minor tonality isn't found in the better-known blues styles of the Delta and Hill Country. Growing up, Mr. Holmes learned from his neighbor, the father of the Bentonia blues, Henry Stuckey, an aging World War I veteran, played to entertain Mr. Holmes and his 13 siblings on their porch. The style is passed from one musician to the next. It can't be learned using sheet music. The old-timers I learned from couldn't read, and they couldn't read sheet music, said Mr. Holmes, who also doesn't read music. They didn't know what a count was, didn't know about minors or sharps or open or closed tuning. They was just playing. They had no idea there was a musical language to what they were doing. Dan Arbach, producer of Cypress Grove and a member of the band The Black Keys, said the beauty of Mr. Holmes' music is the improvisation. Mr. Holmes never played the same song twice. Each performance is a snapshot in time. Those songs, they're like a living organism almost. They are changing daily, he said. You can feel the realness and the immediacy of the music. It's very idiosyncratic, and that's what makes it so special. Now, in this day and age, it's like everything's homogenized and we're all on the same server. Jimmy Duck Holmes lives in a world that time forgot. It hasn't changed. Today, a 4-lane highway diverts traffic away from Bentonia. Businesses of Mr. Holmes' youth have shuttered. Buildings were torn down. More than a quarter of the residents live under the poverty line. The train passes through town daily, but doesn't stop. People my age was tired of going to the cotton fields, Mr. Holmes said. As soon as they got a chance, they got away from Bentonia to Chicago, California, New York. There wasn't nothing here. Mr. Holmes never imagined leaving. He lives on the same farm where he was raised, about a mile from the Blue Front. His presence has become Bentonia's biggest draw. Visitors come from all over the world and the music industry to see him, to hear the music, and to learn the tradition. Before the pandemic, Mississippi musicians performed at the Blue Front every other Friday, sometimes more, playing different blues styles. In 1972, Mr. Holmes started an annual blues festival, now the longest running in Mississippi. He holds Bentonia Blues workshops, and every day he sits behind the counter at the Blue Front. He's willing to teach anyone who walks in. Some fans are surprised he's so accessible, said Robert Connolly Farr, a Mississippi native who's been visiting Mr. Holmes for years for guitar tips, all the way from Vancouver. But for those who know Mr. Holmes, it makes perfect sense. His whole goal in life is to give that sound away, is to perpetuate or further the Bentonia sound, Mr. Farr said. I think it's important to Jimmy that his place is open and that it constantly has music. He wants there to be life in that building. Mr. Holmes has performed in Europe, South America, and across the United States. He opened for the Black Keys in the nation's capital in 2019, but he always comes back home. I would hate if someone took time out of their day to come see me and I wasn't here, he said. I appreciate it that people want to travel from Asia and Europe because they want to know about the blues. I like to be here when they come. Two large portraits at his juke joint pay homage to his mentors, Stuckey and Jack Owens. Mr. Owens continued to teach Mr. Holmes after Stuckey died in 1966. It was a blessed gift they gave to us, Mr. Holmes said, and they were so generous with it. What they gave us changed the world. Mr. Holmes laments that no young people in Bentonia want to learn. They say it's too complicated. People don't appreciate how the blues influenced popular music today, how every genre has roots dating back to it, Mr. Holmes said. But he keeps spare guitars around the Blue Front just in case someone wants to play. It will survive somehow, Mr. Holmes said one gray morning in his empty juke joint. I learned enough that I was able to carry it on, and probably once I'm gone, somebody will be sitting around here playing, someone who picked up the things that I was doing. I have to hope. I have to hope. Well, that concludes the reading of the Christian Science Monitor for Friday, March the 5th. My name is Pam, and I want to thank you for inviting me into your home. Please stay safe till we meet here again. Be blessed, and make it a great day.